finished Bag End. Well, the outside anyway. So after many, many hours of working on it for the last week, Lord, I am finally done with the outside of Bag End. Remember when I thought I could do it in a day? That was cute. I mean, I suppose I could have finished it in a day. I could have just given myself a deadline of however many hours to do whatever I could to like slightly improve it, but I knew I wouldn't have been satisfied with that. I really wanted to revamp the whole thing, and I think all the changes are for the better. Now, if the floor plan changes were for the better, and I definitely think they were, then the terrain changes are for the best. It looks so much better now that I can utilize terrain tools. Without further ado, let's roll that sweet time-lapse footage. So I started by referencing that What a Workshop floor plan. I wanted to make it a little more accurate than I did the first time through. And I got rid of all those hedgerows. And then, once I deleted all the plants from the outside and redid the trim, I wanted the trim to be a little darker, just in case you could see it through any of the plants I was going to put there. Then the tetrising began. This room was the first room that I started with. I kind of ignored it when I originally made this because it wasn't featured much in the movies. I kind of left it as a generic hallway, but the floor plan called it an atrium. And so I decided to give it a bit of a skylight. When I decorate that room, I have plans to put as many plants there as possible and really green up that space. I love these little circular roof pieces because they make excellent skylights. The only problem with the What a Workshop floor plan as given is that there aren't any washrooms noted in it. So I made sure to carve out space in appropriate parts of the house to put in some bathrooms. Like this bathroom, for example, was just called a back room. So there wasn't really any other explanation of what that room might be. So I made it a bathroom. Boy, there was really a lot of back and forth with spacing in this place, because yeah, again, I wanted to make it look more like that floor plan. What that really meant was disjointing the rooms and making hallways that attached them. I made this build before Realm of Magic came out, obviously, but now that I have access to these gorgeous, almost circular hallway arches, I, of course, used them to death. And when you line them all up like that, as your sim is walking through, it really does look like it's architectural, like it's built into the hallway that way, and you don't really notice that there's still walls on the other side. So I really liked the effect that those gave. But in order to make them fit, I had to do a little more rearranging of the layout. I needed to widen all the hallways and the space in between some of the rooms so that I could be sure that they would fit. It took forever, but it was worth it. Like, I had done with rearranging the hallways, and then I remembered those Realm of Magic archways, and I was like, oh, well, back to floor plan doing. And I widened out the hallways and made sure that they would fit and ran some tests, and it looks really good. In the lore of Lord of the Rings, Bag End is supposed to be this, like, grand home, and I had never really considered the fact that it was, especially not in the films, in what we see of it in the films, but building off of this floor plan really made that apparent to me in a way that I hadn't quite appreciated before. when I was finally happy with the layout, I started roofing the build. I discovered while doing the little hobbit hole that the terrain tools kind of creep up over the edge of roofs in a really cool and convenient way, so I made sure to leave as much overhang as I could. Whereas if you leave just a wall, it kind of just comes up beside it. If you have an overhanging roof, it creeps up over the roof, which is exactly what I needed. And just like with the other little hobbit hole, I wanted to get as much slope as I could with this build. This is a 64 by 64 lot, and so like it can't get any bigger than this. And the build was so much larger than my original because of all the extra spacing and hallways, and so it was a little cramped in some of the corners of the lot. And I messed with it for a while, but I'm really happy with how it turned out. And I play tested the landscaping as much as I could. So I had my sim walk up and down the areas I had created and made sure it functioned properly. And then once I was happy with the landscaping, I stopped recording and went into debug. You know, I love the debug stuff. And I pulled everything that I could want. If I saw grass, I pulled like 20 of them into the same pile. It took a really long time. It took like an hour, and I ended up with way more than I needed, but I still prefer doing it that way than to like be 1 or 2 short and have to go digging through the debug again and try to find that one thing I needed. So it was worth it. And it also gives me a good indication of whether or not my computer will be able to handle a lot full of stuff. It has to render all of these things when I place them, even before they go into their final spot. So I knew it wouldn't have a problem when I put them where they were going to go. Oh, this fluffy grass is my absolute favorite thing. They look so thin from the top, but once you get back down to like sim height, it looks beautiful and full and soft, and it really, really fills it out. So these wall vine plants were a really good find, and these other ones from Jungle Adventure proved really useful. I wish that the terrain tools in The Sims allowed you to paint over the rock. I really just like how it like defaults to this rocky texture, and I know it's to like indicate the steepness of the slope, but still, I don't like how they take that agency away from the player. Like, what if I wanted it to be a different kind of rock, you know? It's all that same tan rock, and if I could have just like painted it like grass, I wouldn't have needed to add all these plant coverings. But I suppose it's not such a terrible thing, you know? They do give the build a lot more depth and dimension, and I probably would have put some fluffy plants there anyway. I tried as often as I could to hide the roof trim, and that's where those hanging plants like really came in clutch. also wanted to soften up the edges of the plants as well. Especially the bottom of those little vine things that I love so much. I put a bunch of grasses under there to like kind of, disguise the fact that they were like growing out of the rock and make it look more like they were creeping vines going up from the dirt over the rock up into the roof. Man, moving all these little piles of plants that I had made for myself was such a chore. Yay! Can't we just eyedrop pick items from the debug menu? Can we make that happen? That'd be great. I'm sure that's really hard, and I'm sure that's why you haven't done that, if you ever even have plans to do that, but that would be really wonderful. Please. Oh, I was really happy to find these little natural looking fences. I think they're from Jungle Adventure. They look most like the references I pulled from the movie. I did a lot of terrain painting here, because I also feel like there's not a lot of dirt color options. I mean, there are, but there's never that like one dirt color option that you really, really want. They're all either too textured or too saturated or desaturated, or maybe I'm just too picky. It's probably that. I'm probably just too picky. Ooh, I'm really happy how these little painted stairs I'm doing now turned out. I pulled as much knowledge as I could from my old art classes and tried to paint them on to make them look as three-dimensional as possible. And I think I pulled it off pretty well. I could have just put stairs up to the door, but you can't get that like gentle curve that you see in the movies. And I didn't want to mess with trying to fit the terrain on top of that, so I decided to just try and paint it. And I think it looks really good. I'm really proud of that one little section. Oh, I'm so sad. I forgot to restart my screen recording there, so I lost a little bit of work. A little bit of landscaping that I had done, and all those placing all of those little individual paving stones. But at least you can see them now, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. Oh, these grasses and bushy plants were giving me such a hard time on the slope. Like, they kept sticking out. And so if you went down to sim height, you could see these like floating tufts of grass, and they would like cast shadows and look all weird. So I ended up terracing around the side of the building instead of making it a one long smooth slope. And then the plants laid much better on those terraces, and it still managed to look slopey, especially when I used those big bushier pieces that camouflaged a lot of the terrain. I realized as I started to actually do the landscaping that I pulled so many flowers. I don't know why I did that. Like, this is a grassy build, not a flowery build, but I don't know. I just saw them and I pulled them out. And I tried just kind of littering them around to see how it looked, but it didn't look right. It needed to be grassier and woollier and more green, much less floral. I definitely still used a lot of flowers, but still nowhere near as many as I pulled. That set of 3 ferns might be my favorite debug plant. I don't know why. I love them so much. They're just so lovely and just like exactly the right shade of green. All the landscaping around the building was way more difficult than I anticipated. I was constantly worried that what I was doing would look repetitive, so I tried to be as random as possible in my choices throughout. I definitely had favorites. I definitely had items that I knew could like perform certain tasks for me. It's like, this grass will fill an area, this plant will add texture, and I tried not to overuse them. It's just so useful to build with a sim on the lot. I don't know how builders who don't have their sim with them trust themselves to make things playable, and especially if you're using all these move objects and debug stuff. I have to have my sim there so that I can playtest as I go. Oh, this is definitely my favorite little corner of the lot, because I love that we have access to these ponds now via the debug. And so I've done this several times in my past builds where I put a pool next to the fishing pond and I try to camouflage the two together. Although I still don't like using the matching watercolor that I probably should use. Like there is a dark, like greenish, murky pool color that you can have in there, but I really hate the idea of dipping into that kind of murky green water. It kind of grosses me out. So I always go for that brackish watercolor from Jungle Adventure in all of my natural pools. But really the trickiest part about landscaping the natural pools is camouflaging the pool trim, because that's the thing that makes it look most like here's a pool instead of here's a pond that you just can so happen to swim in. But I've gotten pretty good at doing that because I've done it so much, if I do say so myself. Now I was finally reaching the point when I was really getting comfortable deleting some of the debug stockpiles I had made for myself. They were actually really starting to get in the way of my progress. Like I had to move them all over to move them out of the way of the section I was working on now. But I knew I was still going to use a lot of those things, so I didn't delete them. I'd still rather do that than delete them and have to go searching for them again. Oh, I know my favorite plant. It's those little single square tufts of grass. Those are so useful. Those are so excellent for filling in gaps that looked too harsh or where larger pieces of grass like wouldn't sit properly. Those were the MVP of this build. 10 out of 10 would recommend stockpiling those for sure. Oh, I love that. I love that debug tree. I love that tree. I would buy that tree. Like, that tree should be available for purchase in the regular menu if you don't feel like digging through debug stuff. It has just the funkiest trunk. It makes it look so ancient and like it's had to fight to live. It has a lot of character. So I replaced that old oak with this kind of funky little tree, sized up 1 or 2. And I much prefer the change. And when I was finally happy with all the plant placement, I started the final task of any exterior build for me, which is the terrain paint. I like to place everything first and then go through and add a little more depth and dimension underneath all the plants and in all the paths with the terrain paint. And with the pathways, I really love to try to focus on areas where my Sims would have been more likely to walk. So I darken out those areas and leave the rest kind of lush and green. Oh, this little garden section turned out so well. I'm so happy with it. In the references, I had never realized that there was a little dining table out here. How great is that? And so, you know, I threw some faded looking chairs out there, and so you can have, you know, your second breakfast outside if you wanted to. And with that, we're finally done. Overall, I'm just so stoked with this build. I'm such a sucker for extreme detail, and it's always so much fun to put in as many little hidden gems as you can. For example, that little sign is just the perfect little Sims version of the no admittance except on party business sign by the gate. And I love that so much. That little side garden turned out so pretty. I can just imagine little hobbit Sim spending so much time out there. And this little pond pool, oh, I love it so much. I'm sure it is not canon, as most hobbits notoriously hate water, but I thought it would be a fun gameplay addition. At the very least, you can do some fishing in your bare feet. What do you think? I think it's great. I'm really excited by it. I think it's so pretty. This build, I have recorded an insane amount of footage on this build. It was something like 8 hours. My poor computer was so overwhelmed. I had to render the time lapse in batches and then offload all those hours of footage. It took a minute, but it turned out really well. And this is just the outside. I still have to do the inside. Oh God, who knows when that video is gonna come out? But yeah, thanks for watching. This is really fun. I hope you have fun watching it. I'd super appreciate it if you liked and subscribed and all that cool YouTube stuff. That would be helpful to me. But yeah, even if no one ever sees these, I'm gonna keep making them because I have a lot of fun doing the builds and then making the videos as well. So, yeah. Now we gotta do the inside.